Greetings, brothers and sisters. I'm Father Aaron Leach, and it's time for our latest Patreon-sponsored video. I know we're extremely late getting to this. It is now May 1st, and we're just getting our April video done. I want to thank you all for your patience on this. With the current state of our economy, a lot of our suppliers have a hard time getting the ingredients to us that we need to make our products. So when they do come in, we kind of have to drop everything and kick into high gear to start getting caught up and get things created, get things consecrated, and then get them shipped out to our clients. So we thank you not only for your patience on the videos, but those of you who are ordering our products, especially if you're waiting on back-ordered products. Again, thank you so much for your patience. Everyone is really drawing together and being very wonderful about things because we have to take care of each other right now, and that's just great. And of course, I always want to start out by giving that big shout out to all of our Patreon sponsors. We have lost a couple of folks due to changing financial situations, again, thanks to this pandemic. But those who have stuck in, we want to thank you, and those who have left, and we hope that you'll come back, and when things get a little more balanced and our economy recovers. Though there's no hard feelings on that at all. Now, today, I tried to pick a very simple topic so that I could get the video out sooner. Obviously, that didn't work, but I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, but what we did was we set up an AMA, an Ask Me Anything. So I've gone through all of the responses on my Patreon account, and I've gathered all of the questions together, and I think this might be a very informative little discussion that we can have today. So, without further ado on that, let's just go ahead and dive right into our questions. I'll get my trusty cheaters here, and we will begin. The first thing I should point out as well, I'm only gonna use first names on this, and you may have noticed that our Patreon sponsors were all first name only. I've had a couple of people request that I not use their last names. I mean, we are talking about occultism, and they're concerned about their privacy. So from here on out, we're just going to stick with first names. I was going to make a list of people who wanted their names to be anonymous and those who didn't care, but that's going to get unwieldy and I might forget. And it's just easier if everyone goes with first names. That won't count if you're using a magical name, like if it's Fraud or something. I'm not just going to call you Fraud or something like that, okay? So this first question, I believe, was asked by two people, Dominic and Brobberlish Hode. And the question is, from your point of view, what is the difference between the Holy Guardian Angel and the Supernatural Assistant? Now, for those of you who don't know, the Holy Guardian Angel is a figure that comes from the Book of Abramelin, and I am myself an Abramelin initiate. This white curtain here is blocking your view of my Eastern altar, which is dedicated to my Guardian Angel. It's a very, the Book of Abramelin is a very involved rite. There's a short version that takes 6 months to complete, and then the full and original version takes 18 months to complete. So it's very involved. As for the Supernatural Assistant, this comes from the Greek Magical Papyri, which we refer to in short as the PGM. And it's similar enough to the concept of the Holy Guardian Angel that there has been a lot of confusion over the years. Many authors have just flat out equated them, said they're the same thing, and that is actually not the case at all. Now, to be honest, I believe that there is some connection, historically speaking. The Book of Abramelin, which was written, was written by Abraham of Worms, but the actual Abramelin rite was supposed to have come from a man named Abramelin, who was a hermit living out in the deserts outside of Egypt. Not literally, but figuratively speaking, if you look on a map of northern Africa today, you'll see that he lived just down the street from where the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered. So though Abraham the Jew, who wrote the book that we have today, and his mentor Abramelin, from whom he got the material, they are Jewish, and they were very devout Jews. It's a Jewish system. It follows Jewish holy days and Jewish rituals and fasts. But there is also a very heavy imprint of Gnosticism in the text. So obviously, at least Abramelin was open to some outside sources instead, outside of Judaism. I mean, and it's entirely possible that he also encountered not just Gnostic material in Egypt, but also the Greek magical papyri, which those are essentially, it's a collection of papyri from Egypt that originated after the time of Alexander the Great's invasion. So this is Greco-Egypt we're talking about. So if to put this into perspective, if you imagine the ancient pharaonic Egyptian religion with its temples, and they had priests assigned to those temples, then Alexander the Great comes down, and now all of a sudden those are gone. The pharaoh's gone. His priests are no longer in power. They're all out of a job. They're at home. And now there's this huge influx of Greek material, which also included a lot of Jewish material as well. This area of the world was kind of a melting pot at this point. So the Greek magical papyri are kind of what the old priests were writing at home now that they were out of a job. So rather than working at a temple, they were just sorcerers who worked at home now, and you would call on them if you needed a talisman or if you needed healing or that kind of thing. So they were like I said, they were more like sorcerers now. They weren't state recognized any longer, and so they took all of the old mysteries and knowledge that they had learned in the temples, but now they didn't have the temple to practice it in. So now it's like a home version of the Egyptian magic. And again, with the Greek, with a lot of Greek influence and Hebrew influence and such too. So that's kind of the origin of the Greek magical papyri. And they did have a figure in those spells, which was called the supernatural assistant. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. But the supernatural assistant is very, very much a solar entity. There's a very involved ritual. It doesn't take months, but it is still a very involved ritual in which you call down what it describes as a god. You're calling a god down, just as they would have done in the temples. Now this is telling you how to do it at home. And this god, you become bonded with this god so that it becomes, well, your supernatural assistant. It not only teaches you, guides you, protects you, but you can also send it out to do things and to bring things to you that you need and to bring prosperity and to bring love. And so it's kind of your, it's more than just a familiar spirit, because it's all, like I said, it is also a god. It's like a very powerful solar type familiar spirit. And there's a lot of, there are several echoes of that in the book of Abramelin. The Holy Guardian Angel is, drawing from its Gnostic imprint, the Holy Guardian Angel is not solar. It's not assigned to the sun or any other planet. It's not assigned to any of the stars. It comes from beyond them. It comes from what the Gnostics called the pleroma, the fullness. What in the Kabbalah you might recognize as absolute, the divine realm above nature. But it's still, and this is why I think there might be an imprint from the PGM here, because even though it is above all astrological concerns, there's still a whole lot of solar imagery that goes in with it. Sunday is an extremely important day. You're supposed to work the rituals for the guardian angel. You have to do them at morning, noon, and dusk. And of course, those are stations of the sun. There's even rules in the book that you're supposed to sleep at night, not during the day, because you need to be up and active when the sun is in the sky. So there's a lot of little, like I said, echoes. It's not really blatant, but it's clear that there's solar imagery being. Oh, and also even the rite of Abramelin itself, where you call the angel, it has to start on essentially the spring equinox. Although because this is Jewish, you start it right after Passover, and then it follows the waxing and waning of the sun. So if you do the 6-month version, you begin it at the spring equinox when the sun is getting stronger, and you go all the way to approximately the fall equinox where the sun starts to wane again. If you do the 18-month version, you're doing that, but you're actually following the sun through an entire cycle. So you'll start at Passover, you do 12 full months until you get back to Passover, and then the final phase is just that 6 months. So you'll always begin on the spring equinox and end on the fall equinox. Or in the case of with Jewish holidays, it's Passover, and at the end is the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which they call it. So what I'm saying is that while there are a lot of similarities, it's not a one-to-one correspondence. For example, in the book of Abramelin, the functions that would be attributed to the supernatural assistant have been split. Because the guardian angel is above nature, then the guardian angel is only concerned with your spiritual growth, your evolution, keeping you on the right path, healing you, rescuing, redeeming you. It is literally the Redeemer, as Christianity would refer to it, the Christos, the Logos, or the Holy Spirit. So all of the things that are earthly, that the supernatural assistant could also do, such as fetching things for you, bringing love, bringing money, even the idea that you could order it around, you can't order around your holy guardian angel. It teaches you, it leads you. You have to do what it instructs. But in Abramelin, once you gain this contact with the guardian angel, you immediately turn to the chthonic forces and you summon the princes of hell, and from then you gain 4 familiars. And they too are linked to the stations of the sun. One rules beginning at dawn, one at noon, one at dusk, and one at midnight. And of course, these are the entities, these 4 familiars, they're the ones that you can actually command. They're the ones that will go out and fetch things for you and do all of the earthly things that a transcendent, that is above nature, entity is not interested in. So no, the answer to the question you guys ask is no, they are not the same. Even though historically speaking, strictly academically, you can definitely see where PGM ideas have probably landed in Abramelin, along with Gnostic ideas and Jewish ideas altogether. And those of you who have not read the German original Abramelin and you've only read the French one, that's yet another version of the text. That's the 6-month version, by the way. And the French edition was actually translated by a Christian Solomonic magician. So in there, they've translated all of the Jewish references over into Christian references. So even in that one, you now have an inclusion of Christian symbolism as well. It's very solar, just like the supernatural assistant is. He's a solar god. No, you can order around the supernatural assistant. You can give it commands, but you can't do that to your guardian angel. They are very different beings. All right, so let's get on to our next question. This comes from Jesus. And actually, we got several questions from Jesus tonight. But he says, what's your take on sorcery being called a sin in the Bible? That's actually a very good question. And there are a lot of passages in the Bible that outlaw sorcery, that outlaw having familiar spirits, like I was just describing, that outlaw astrology, that outlaw doing anything whatsoever that could be called witchcraft. But here's the thing. And this is true not just in the Bible, but of politics throughout history. It's not outlawing sorcery. It's outlawing sorcery for you. Just like in today's political climate, people who are against abortion, they're not actually against abortion. Because if their sister, if their daughter, if somebody they love gets in trouble and needs to go have that procedure done, they quietly go and have it done, even though publicly they're ranting and raving against anyone being allowed to do that, because they're not actually against abortion. They understand that it's something that has to be done sometimes. They're only against it for you. The same is true with homosexuality. Any political or religious figure that you see ranting and raving about how evil homosexuality is, how often do we find those people engaging in homosexuality? They get caught in airport bathrooms. They get caught in hotel rooms. They get caught doing all sorts of nefarious things. Why? Because they're not really against homosexuality. They're just against homosexuality for you. And the exact same thing is true in the Bible. You can quote any verse you want at me about how sorcery or astrology or witchcraft or magic is bad and evil and you'll burn in hell for doing it. And yet the Urim and the Thummim exist, which were 2 stones that the high priest would carry into the Holy of Holies in the temple in order to divine answers from Yahweh to serious questions. You'll read in the Bible how when it came time to choose a high priest, Moses gathered representatives from all the tribes and had them put their staffs in the tabernacle in its holy of holies. And they came back. They left them overnight, and they came back the next morning, and they saw that Aaron's staff had actually produced almond buds. It was an almond staff, and it had produced buds, even though it was already a dead staff. And no other staff had done that, so clearly God had chosen Abraham. And even outside of the Bible, of course, in the Midrashim, that means legends. There's all sorts of stories of the prophets working all kinds of different magical rituals and divinations, such as Jacob, for instance. They say he went down to sleep and laid his head on a rock, and then had these visions of angels climbing the ladder of the zodiac up and down heaven. And as a kid, you might have asked, wait a minute, why would this guy have laid down on a rock to go to sleep? That makes no sense. The answer, however, is that it was shamanism. By laying his head on the rock, which is very uncomfortable, it would keep him from going into a deep, peaceful sleep. It would keep him in that in-between realm, between waking and sleeping, and thus produce visions. So the prophets, the priests, these guys were constantly using magic. They were constantly holding conversation with angels and with spirits, and they were performing exorcisms and performing divinations. So the Bible does not actually say that sorcery and magic and divination are bad. It's only saying that it's bad for you. Only they were allowed to do it because they were the state. If you were a priest in Yahweh's temple, you were allowed to do all of that, because you were supported by the state. But they didn't want regular people doing it. You see this, for example, when it's describing the recipe for the sacred incense that would be burned in the temple. It says that this can be burned in the temple, but if anybody out in the tribes is found burning this stuff just because they like the smell, in their own homes, they were to be drug out to the edge of the encampment and stoned to death. So again, it was okay for the priest to burn that sacred incense, but it wasn't okay for you to do it. So honestly, and regardless of what your view on the Bible is, this is simply a form of political hypocrisy. It was simply a matter of the state controlling what it felt gave it power. The same way you saw in Haiti for so long, when their government was literally a voodoo government, and they were brutal, and they did not allow people to practice rituals that they practiced, and they would use those rituals against their opponents and their dissidents, and they really terrorized people for a long time doing that kind of thing. So this kind of thing is not new. It's around today. It's been around in the recent past. It's been around as long as writing has existed among human beings. A certain group of people will get into power, and then they will be jealous of what gives them that power, and it will be fine for them to do it, but it's not okay for you to do it. So keep that in mind when you run into these statutes in the Bible against, you're not allowed to use this, this magic. You're not allowed to talk to spirits. You're not allowed to call down angels. But then you'll see all the prophets and priests doing exactly that. And in my view, we today who are studying these traditions, we are today's prophets. Especially if you undertake something like Abramelin, or if you progress through something like the Golden Dawn into their inner order. Once you reach a level of attainment and spiritual authority, you are a prophet. So that is why you're allowed to do that. That is why those restrictions in the Bible against all of these practices don't apply, because you have ceased being a commoner, a regular person. And frankly, I think it would be ridiculous today to persecute anybody, whether you view them as a prophet or not, for engaging in whether it's tarot divination or astrology or Wicca or what the Golden Dawn or Thelema uses. I think that the time of that, hopefully, at least for now, has passed. Things change very quickly. But those restrictions are just basically hypocrisy. And in my view, they can just be ignored. It's because they were doing everything they were saying we're not allowed to do. So it was just a matter of them setting themselves up on high and saying that they were special. Oh, it's different when we do it. And that's, I mean, let's face it, that's just nonsense. Okay, so let's go on to our next question. This is another one from Brotherlish Hode. He says, as I often use the Trithemius way of communicating with my altars, which, for those who don't know, there's a book. It's attributed to Trithemius, but we don't know if he actually wrote it. But it's called The Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals. And it's really just a basic manual for how to scry, how to invoke angels or spirits or whatever spiritual entity you're working with, and use a crystal ball or another reflective surface. In the grimoires, it's called the Almadel tradition, or even the Armadel tradition. It goes all the way back to when, like the Pythoness, the high priestess in ancient Greece, they take her to a cave. Now in her case, legend has that they actually set her up over a fissure in the rock in the cave, and that there were certain fumes coming up from the fissure that would produce visions. But it was more common, even in Greece and Rome and the Celtic lands and Europe and everywhere. It's been very common throughout history to find sacred pools and wells in which you can gaze and lose yourself into the flowing surface or the shiny surface and begin to have visions. Okay, so that's what the Trithemius method really is. It's just about scrying into a crystal ball. Okay, so Boberlish says, as I often use the Trithemius way of communicating with my altars, the use of the Most High and Jesus seems essential to make the cogs spin and to make things happen. Yet I do not have an altar to these two. I would love to hear your view of how to treat and have these higher forces included in a novice's practice. This is kind of interesting because when I've been promising you guys now for years that I'm going to get my Solomonic 102 material, which is going to have all the Goetia stuff and how to work with demons and all that dark stuff that you guys are clamoring for. But the first class that I plan for the 102 material is actually going to be more of a Guardian Angel / Abramelin class than it's going to be. It's not going to talk about the lower forces. The very first class is going to be about connecting to your guardian angel. I'm not going to focus so much on the Holy Guardian Angel of Abramelin, although like I said, it'll be sort of an Abramelin class. I will explain it there, but it's going to focus more on your Nativity Angel. That Guardian Angel is often confused with the Holy Guardian Angel, but the Nativity Angel is linked to your birth chart. He is directly linked to the stars that you were born under. Whereas I said the Holy Guardian Angel is above all of that. He's in the pleroma. He or she comes from above nature. But that's getting beside the point. The point is, I will be covering in that class, I'll go over in detail on how to set up an altar, either to your Nativity Angel, or just to the higher forces in general. So in my case, again, I'm going to refer to this altar over here, covered with the white curtain, and this is the eastern half of my temple over here. This is my eastern altar. It's a white altar covered with a white cloth, and of course it has my Abramelin stuff on it, and it's surrounded with this white curtain that you see here. And I go to this altar on every Sabbath, which for me is Sunday. I come in here at dawn, and I have to say prayers, lighting the candle, lighting the incense, reciting, the proper psalm, and there's a lot to it. That's all specific to Abramelin. But as I said earlier, the Holy Guardian Angel is analogous to the Redeemer, the Holy Spirit. And that's exactly what Brotherlish is talking about here. He calls on the Holy Spirit. He calls on Jesus. He calls on the highest God. And it's not that it's really not necessarily to call on Jesus by that name, but you do have to focus on the Redeemer, the Christos, the Logos, the highest divine force that we simple monkeys here on the planet Earth, on this little dust ball flinging around the sun, can comprehend as God. And that is the Christos. That is the highest, the Lord of hosts, as he's often called in the grimoires. So yes, it is important. I do not do any work It doesn't matter if it's Golden Dawn, Grimoire magic. It doesn't matter whether I'm working at one of my Archangel altars around the house or whether I'm working at this altar right here behind me. I always go into this curtained area first. I light that lamp. I light that incense. I pray to the highest God that I can comprehend, and I ask for my guardian angel to be sent and to open the way for me. She is the one that opens the gates between the physical world and the spiritual world. She is the one that brings any angel or spirit or entity that I'm trying to work with. She brings that to me. If I'm trying to work a divination, she is the one that will either bring to me, like if I'm working through Raphael, she'll bring Raphael to me for that divination. Or if I'm just doing a general divination, I'll just do it straight through her and I'll ask her to reveal things to me and to speak with me. So yeah, without that authority behind you, it's going to be a lot of hard going for you. Now, I understand a lot of traditions don't do this, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're useless or pointless, but I can tell you that in my own experience, going to that highest first and being granted the blessing, the grace, the spiritual authority, and the backing of your guardian angel is paramount, is so powerful that I could not imagine working in any other fashion. So, in answer to your question, Broverlish, set up an altar. Set it up in the east. Surround it with a white curtain. Even outside of the Abramelin stuff, the book of the Key of Solomon even talks about this. Establishing an altar surrounded by a white curtain, and that's where you go in and do your work. That's where you go in and do your initial invocations. Even John Dee, the author of the Enochian system that's so powerful, the way he would work, he had a scryer by the name of Edward Kelly. So they were using kind of the Trithemius method. They were using the Almadel method and scrying into a crystal ball. And the way they actually worked is Dee would go into an oratory. He had a prayer room, which at the time he lived, which is the late 1500s, it was very common for upper class homes to be built with little small rooms off to the side, connected but off to the side. And that's where you were supposed to go to do your prayers. That way it could be separated from your mundane life. It was a holy place. It was a sanctum. It was a place of retreat. And for me, that's this curtained area. And so you go in there, you go into your oratory, and Dee would go into his oratory, and he would invoke the highest. He would just pray to God and pray and pray and pray until Kelly, who was outside in Dee's study, which was the connected room, sitting at the holy table looking into the crystal ball, he would announce, okay, I see something. And that's when Dee would finish up his prayers and come out, and they would start talking to all these angels. So yeah, that's something that's often missed in a lot of modern systems. They just tell you, hey, cast the circles, start chanting. But honestly, doing this with like having an Eastern altar, or if you don't have a separate altar, do it at the altar you're working at, But you always want to start by invoking the highest first and asking for the gates to be open, for your eyes to be open, for you to be empowered and strengthened. And that is very necessary. And if you do have the space, and you're fortunate enough, like I am, to have my own, separate temple space, definitely set up an altar in the east, cover it with white. You don't want it to be one planet or one force or another. So everything should just be white. You don't have to put sigils and symbols and all sorts of special things in there. Just the altar covered in white with a candle and incense. And that is your basic anchor point for everything else that you'll do. But yeah, well, I'll go into more detail on that in the class, of course. But that's the essential answer. Definitely a good idea to do that.